What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the Call of Duty Vanguard Beta is now over, and in today's video, I wanted to do sort of a final wrap-up review, just final thoughts on the beta in general. Keep in mind, many of the things I'm bringing up in today's video are going to be things that I've already made videos on. I've been trying to focus on each individual piece of feedback, so I can give the most depth to that feedback possible throughout the beta. So for those that already watch every single one of my videos, many of the things I bring up today, it's stuff I've already talked about. But I did want to wrap it up all together into a final sort of review. And diving right in, what do I think about the beta in general? I thought it was great. I'm actually really sad to see that it's gone. I've been grinding it hard just about every single day. Every day that I could at least spare the time to play, I was playing the beta. I was excited every morning to wake up and play it. And I think anybody that watched my streams throughout the beta, you could very clearly tell I was enjoying myself with this. I know that may be hard for a lot of people to swallow. I realize the game is not perfect, and we're going to be talking about that a lot in this video. But despite the issues, I still had a great time playing this, and I'm looking forward to the full build of the game. When it comes to the things that I really enjoyed about this, the big thing was just the general pacing and flow of the game. To me, this felt like the kind of flow and pacing that I look for in a Call of Duty game. I see a lot of people saying that this is just a Modern Warfare clone, and that has not been my experience whatsoever when it comes to the gameplay pacing and flow. And this pacing and flow mainly comes down to the map design as well as the spawns, and I'm not saying the spawns are perfect, don't get me wrong, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the map designs, I really like the variety of the maps, not only in their setting, but also the layout. For the most part, they've got great flow to them, and even the ones that are a little on the campy side, like Red Star, I see complaints about that being way too campy, and then Gavutu with the top area on the boat. I find the camping positions in these maps extremely predictable and counterable. There are plenty of lines of sight to easily pick those people off on the top of the Gavutu boat. Seems like a lot of people didn't take the time to try and figure those out, and therefore I see a lot of complaints about that. And I have a hard time taking those seriously because anytime somebody was in the top of the boat there, I saw that as a free kill. Then when it comes to Red Star, you have the very clear camping or power positions on that map. But again, they're really obvious positions, so you always know to be keeping an eye out for them. And they had multiple entry points, so they were easy to counter based on my experience. And so the people that are comparing these maps to like Modern Warfare maps, for instance, I just don't see it. Modern Warfare maps were much more porous. There were many more locations that were in really obscure areas of the map that could be easily fortified and camped in. And that just wasn't my experience playing the Vanguard Beta. And to me, pacing and flow are some of the most important elements of a Call of Duty game. And like I said, I enjoyed that with Vanguard. But on top of this, in general, the gunplay felt great. I do have some points that I'm going to be talking about, some points of feedback for that. I love the fact that Ghost only works while moving, which again, this goes against that whole Modern Warfare clone thing. I feel like people were encouraged to move much more. I really like the addition of combat pacing, so you can sort of choose how chaotic you want the experience to be. Although, of course, at launch, I hope this is supported a lot better, because in the beta, you wouldn't always get the combat pacing that you selected. You could filter for blitz, but still sometimes get tactical, which felt a little bit off, but I feel like, and I really hope at least at launch, if you select your gameplay filter, it will lock you into that filter, or maybe go like one step in either direction, but not two steps in the other direction. Then on top of that, the brand new mode Patrol, I really enjoy this, and I definitely see myself playing this post-launch, especially once they get the spawns in a better state. That is the one mode where the spawns were exceptionally bad, and that's very likely due to the fact that this is a brand new mode, and they need to figure out how they're going to handle the spawns properly on that. We actually did see some improvements from week 1 to week 2, at least on the maps that we had access to in week 1. And speaking of spawns, I love the fact that mid-beta, they decided to completely scrap that spawn camera, that overhead view and that little bit of a spawn delay where you have to like fly into your body after you died. I just feel like that had no real place in regular Call of Duty multiplayer, and I'm glad they just decided to scrap it completely. So yeah, that's just sort of like a quick general overview of what I enjoyed about this beta and why I was having so much fun with it personally. Now let's move on to the section that I'm going to be calling objectively bad. These are things that are not so much about like design decisions and maybe some subjective disagreements there. These are the things that I just feel absolutely need to be worked on and improved. And the first big one that stood out to me is the audio. The audio was terrible throughout the beta. I'll just say that right up front. It was not in a good state at all. It wasn't polished. Gunfire sounded super muffled. Footstep audio was nearly non-existent. And while I don't think it should be super loud, I would like to see some footstep audio for sure. But the good news here is Sledgehammer has acknowledged this a couple times already. They're going to be completely reworking the audio at launch, and therefore there's not much to say about it in this video, aside from I will judge it at launch, and I'll let you guys know what I think once we get to it. But next up, we have visibility while firing, and they actually made some huge improvements from week 1 to week 2. They used to have a distortion effect every time you fired your gun, and this looked terrible. It would also blur your vision around the center of your screen. It was absolutely awful in gunfights to be able to try and track your target as you're shooting them. And thankfully for weekend 2, they completely eliminated that distortion effect. I really hope they keep that out of there 100% for weapon fire. I can understand that distortion effect for like explosions and stuff, not for firing a gun. But having said that, even though there were massive improvements there, I still feel like a bit more work should be done on the amount of smoke that comes out when you fire your gun. It still looks to me much more like we're firing black powder weapons here, which we aren't. So not only is the current amount of smoke not realistic, it also harms the gameplay experience, in my opinion, because it reduces your ability to track your targets properly as you're firing, and that's a big part of gun skill in an FPS game. So if possible, Sledgehammer, I'd love to see you tone that down a little bit, maybe just reduce the opacity on it, or the volume of that smoke. That would be great to see. And on that same topic of visibility, let's talk a little bit about map visibility. The first thing is the sun, especially on PC. I noticed the sun was way too bright. I barely noticed this on PlayStation though. In either case, this is a bug, and Sledgehammer has confirmed that they will be nerfing the sun for launch, so I'm not too concerned about that for launch. But another thing I noticed, at least on a couple of the maps, particularly Red Star, I feel like there is too much haze on the map. And this is especially frustrating because a lot of the lines of sight on Red Star, if you look at it from one direction, it looks terribly hazy. You can barely see anything but the enemy name tags. Like, you can't see character models very well at all. However, from their perspective, they can see you perfectly clearly. And that does create an actual gameplay balance issue. And also, it's just frustrating in a multiplayer environment like this to not be able to see a character model just because there is haze in the environment and in the map. I also noticed this especially in certain areas of the maps where if you're going from outside to inside, that transition time takes way too long and it's extremely hazy and practically blinding as you come into a room. Whereas anybody that's already in that room, again, they can see perfectly clearly there, and that is just a balance issue. So I really hope they can tighten up some of those effects for launch and make it just a little bit more clear and balanced for everyone involved. Next, let's talk about spawns. This is another objectively bad issue, especially when we're looking at Patrol as a mode. Like I said, that one was a big problem mode. I didn't have nearly as many issues on like TDM or Domination, but Patrol was especially bad. And then also, of course, Blitz on these smaller maps like Eagle's Nest or Hotel Royal. The spawns were pretty terrible, even though it is to be at least somewhat expected when you pack a massive player count into a really small map like that. In either case, if you actually played the game a lot in the first weekend and the second weekend, you should have noticed some pretty significant improvements from the first weekend to the second across the board. And this is due to the fact that in order to balance spawns, they have to collect a ton of data from us, the players in the beta, and even at launch, they're going to have to do this. And they have to do it for every single map mode combination in the game, and each of those has to be balanced individually. This is why, if you look on Reddit, for instance, most of the spawn complaints in the second weekend were on Eagle's Nest, the one map that we didn't have access to in the first weekend, and therefore the map where we didn't have any spawn improvements made. So while it is understandable to some extent that the spawns were in a rough state, I hope they can really tighten things up, and I hope it doesn't take them too long to balance the spawns on all of the other maps that we get at launch as well. Because make no mistake, we will be going through that issue for the first month or so of the game, just like we do every year with Call of Duty, where they have to balance out the spawns on every single map and mode combination. So I do fully expect to see those improve, although it might take some time after launch. Next up, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the general bugs and glitches, especially on Xbox. Now, I personally didn't play the beta on Xbox at all, but I have lots of followers that were tweeting me clips. I saw a lot of the clips there. Xbox especially seemed to have a lot of graphical issues, crazy bugs, looked like you were in a rave at some point. And while they did make some improvements apparently throughout the second weekend, they didn't catch every single one of those bugs, but I'm sure many of them they'll be able to work out between now and launch. But in either case, I still wanted to throw it into the objectively bad section here. And then finally, for objectively bad things, this is the cheating situation. Now, personally, I didn't run into a single obvious cheater throughout the beta, but they were there. There were plenty of clips out there of people using aimbots, wall hacks, things like that in the beta, which is very frustrating to see. And with this, I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what their fancy new anti-cheat is going to be like once the Warzone integration happens. I believe that's when the anti-cheat is coming. And again, this is one of those things where it's like, I know there's something coming in the future, just like with the audio balance, but I can't judge it until we actually get that. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully it works well, but I don't know. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I've got here for the objectively bad section with the beta. These are the types of things I feel that at least pretty much everybody out there can agree on need some work. Now let's get into the section where this is more so going to be subjective. These are design decisions that I disagree with and I hope we see some improvement to or some fixes to. But at the end of the day, these are things that are going to be entirely at the discretion of the developers. For many of them, I can totally accept and live with the fact that they are not going to change if they don't end up changing, but I hope to see at least several of these improved in some way. Even if they don't go full on with what I would like, it would be nice to see at least some compromises, maybe meet in the middle with some of these areas, and I think that would be nice to see. And let's start it off with sprint out times. The sprint to fire times in general in the beta, in my opinion, especially when you look at the time to kill of this game, the sprint out times were too slow across the board. So I would love to see the general sprint out time reduced even just a little bit. 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds in some cases would be nice to see. And then of course the big outliers in the beta, the M1 Garand and the ITRA Burst, those had absolutely terrible sprint out times that were so far off where they should be, in my opinion at least. Like a 700 millisecond sprint out time in a game where most guns are killing in about 200 to 300 milliseconds, that just doesn't make sense to me at all. I don't think any gun in the game should have a sprint out time longer than 500 milliseconds for a Tac Sprint out. And then even for the standard gun out there, like I said, I would like to see it sped up a little bit, just so that it's balanced a little bit more in line with the fast time to kill of this game. But next up, another design decision that I just completely disagree with. This is the radar perk. I'm sure Sledgehammer's heard this a million times already, but I'm gonna say it again. This perk, in my opinion, should just be built in for everyone. The overall pacing and flow of the gameplay would benefit greatly. We have multiple options to stay off the radar using a suppressor or the subsonic ammo type, which apparently both of those individually will keep you off the radar after playing the beta and experiencing that. So having radar as a perk in this game, it's going to end up being a full-on crutch perk for many people, myself included. And this really doesn't make much sense to me to include a perk that's obviously going to be a crutch perk, because using it straight up improves the general gameplay experience quite a bit, and not using it really makes you feel like you're missing out on something and the gameplay experience suffers, at least for anybody that actively checks their minimap. This might not be an issue for those that don't use a minimap, but even for those players, I don't think it would hurt them to have radar built in. But after that, we have Dead Silence as a field upgrade. I've shared all of my thoughts on this in great detail. This does concern me. In the beta state with the way the audio was, this wasn't an issue because you couldn't really hear footstep audio anyway, so it's as if everybody had Dead Silence built in as a perk. But once they fix the audio issues, this is a big concern of mine, having Dead Silence as a field upgrade rather than a perk. But again, this is something I'm just going to have to judge for myself once the game launches. I just wanted to express my concern though. After that, another design decision I completely disagree with is the Frangible ammo type in the state that it was in the beta. With Frangible, this not only increases the amount of flinch that you deal to the enemy player, which leads to a lot of inconsistency in their gunfights, because from gunfight to gunfight, they don't know if they're playing against somebody that is using Frangible or not using Frangible, and therefore you can't even really properly compensate for that flinch. And second, there is no downside whatsoever to using Frangible. And since it is such a powerful ammo type that is working for you in basically every gunfight you get into, I feel this is one of those ammo types that should have a downside to it. Make it so you have reduced bullet penetration. That would make sense with Frangible ammunition, and I think it would be something to keep it in check. But on top of that, I still strongly disagree with this increasing your flinch at all. I think the amount of flinch that you experience should be under your own personal control. If you want to put attachments on that improve your flinch resistance or harm your own flinch resistance, that's fine. I don't think that should be something that your enemy has any say in or any control over. But after that, we have the suppression mechanic. Now, this is something, admittedly, I really want to get into custom games and do some proper testing on this. I don't know every single detail of how this works, but as they've described it, The suppression mechanic works if you are shooting near a target. It will not only give them some visual distortion with their view, but it will also slow their movement speed down. And it's that second part that I just disagree with on a fundamental level. I don't feel like this is something that should be happening. You shouldn't be rewarded for missing your target, and they shouldn't be punished for trying to get away from somebody that is missing them and has bad aim. That's a mechanic that may fit with a more like realistic milsim tactical style shooter, but in a game like Call of Duty, I think at most the suppression effect should be purely visual. But moving on to the next thing I want to talk about, this is the time to kill, but I made a video talking about this already. The base time to kill to the body is actually fine in my opinion. It's very normal for Call of Duty. My issue here is the super high headshot multipliers combined with relatively high flinch, and also inconsistent flinch because the enemy has a say in how much you flinch. So again, you can't even properly compensate and predict this, and this leads to a lot of inconsistency in gunfights because many people are getting random lucky headshots. You're not necessarily rewarded for actively aiming for the head because of the flinch. And therefore, I'd like to see the headshot multiplier toned down so we get a more consistent time to kill across the board. And in general, a flinch reduction would be nice, or at the very least, take that ability away from enemy players to have an impact on your personal flinch. But then we have Killstreaks, and this is another area where I just disagree with this. I think Scorestreaks are objectively superior, not Cold War style, the traditional Call of Duty Scorestreaks. These are objectively superior for objective modes. They heavily encourage and reward objective play, and in a mode like Patrol, for instance, I would be on that patrol point so much more often if there were a real individual benefit for doing so. Call of Duty players tend to be selfish at their core, and they're working on their own individual challenges and their own individual streaks. So things like Scorestreaks have a very positive impact on the gameplay flow when it comes to objective modes. And I would love to see at launch the ability to choose, without having to use a perk, the ability to choose between Scorestreaks or Killstreaks. That would be the best of both worlds, in my opinion. Next up in design decisions I disagree with, the fact that we have no factions, which has been confirmed for launch, although maybe they'll be able to pivot on this. This is just an area that doesn't make much sense to me. It's also a little bit jarring in a game when you see your teammate, and then 2 seconds later you see that exact same character, but it's an enemy. This wasn't a massive issue that I had throughout the beta, but it was one of those things that's just an unnecessary annoyance that could be easily resolved if they just had factions, or at least did something a little bit better to differentiate the character models between friendly and enemy. Moving on, yesterday's video, we talked about the Tac Sprint Delay. So if you come out of a slide cancel and try to get back into a Tac Sprint, there is a significant delay in Vanguard compared to Modern Warfare and Warzone. I believe this is intentional, but in my opinion, that Tac Sprint Delay is a little bit much. It'd be nice if maybe they could meet in the middle on that. It doesn't have to be as fast as Modern Warfare or Warzone, but a little bit faster than it currently is in Vanguard, I think would go a long way in helping those players that think that the movement in this game is just too clunky compared to Modern Warfare. But finally, in my design decisions that I disagree with section here, I've got a couple of the biggest complaints I've had over the past 2 years of Call of Duty. And while they may not really be under control of Sledgehammer, I don't know how much control Sledgehammer has in this area, I have to continue pointing this out because this is something that I feel has destroyed a big part of the heart and soul of Call of Duty. And this is disbanding lobbies and the matchmaking system. Now, when it comes to the matchmaking system, I'm pretty confident Sledgehammer has basically zero say in this. But when it comes to disbanding lobbies, this is one area where I really hope there could at least be a compromise in the future. I actually don't expect this to change for launch at all. I think this is more of a higher level decision that has nothing to do with trying to improve the gameplay experience. But I'm not going to stop pointing this out because I feel like a huge chunk of the heart and soul of Call of Duty is missing because they are forcing lobbies to disband. So many of us miss the days when we had a social experience where you could play against the same people match after match, forming rivalries, forming friendships. All of that was completely thrown out the window in Modern Warfare, and that was one of the things that made Call of Duty great. That was one of the things that would make me grind in the same lobby for hours and hours on end. And I do think this contributes just as much as skill-based matchmaking to my lack of playtime in recent years with Call of Duty. I just don't have that same drive anymore to play game after game after game because there's just no continuity across my matches. Instead of trying to figure out how I'm going to beat those players that beat me last game, or how I can counter that one particular player that's a nuisance on the enemy team, instead of doing that, now the lobbies just disband, and this leads to a much more hollow gameplay experience. And I really hope this is something that we can see a change to at some point in the future. But with that, we have one final section. This one's going to be a bit more rapid fire on just a bunch of minor details I noticed that are either little bugs or strange behaviors, things that I feel could be improved and tightened up a little bit. These are all very minor though. The first one is the field mic health, I think is just too high. It takes way too many bullets to destroy one. I realize you can run up to it and melee it in one hit. However, sometimes you don't want to enter the radius of that field mic and you just want to quickly be able to deal with it. I'm not saying it should only take 1 or 2 bullets, but I don't think it should be taking half a magazine to do that. Next up, on the same topic of field mics, something I really noticed is it's really hard to see that little blue dot on friendly field mics. Even if you're actively looking for it, it's almost impossible to see that blue dot. It would be nice if friendly field mics were highlighted a little bit more clearly than they currently are. Maybe make that dot not as faded as it currently is. Make it a little bit more vibrant so you can actually see with a really quick glance that that is a teammate's field mic. Then the counter UAV, this just lasts way too long in my opinion. I think it lasts for over a minute, which is way too long for a streak like that. 30 to 45 seconds at most, I think is where that should be. Then we just have strange behavior when it comes to destructible areas. I noticed this especially on the bar in Hotel Royal. When you destroy that glass section above the bar, this is an area where there's sometimes some little visual bugs. I'm sure they can work out those visual bugs, but on top of the visual stuff, I noticed that aim assist often wouldn't work. If I hopped up on the bar there, I could very clearly see the full enemy character model, so there was nothing obstructing my view from that player, and yet I would get 0 aim assist on him. And I know mouse and keyboard players might laugh at that complaint, but at the end of the day, it's all about consistency, and it's really frustrating to get aim assist in some situations, and then no aim assist in other situations when you feel that there's no reason to not have aim assist in that situation. So hopefully they can do a little bit of work on those areas. Then we have the care package. I didn't use the care package much because I just don't, but I did see several people on my team doing this, and I have heard the complaints online as well. The care packages just bounce way too much. I think they need to be a little bit more weighted, just so they don't bounce around nearly as much, and when they hit the ground, they generally would just stick to hitting the ground. Then on that same topic of killstreaks, when it comes to the death machine, and I believe the war machine works like this as well, but I forgot to go ahead and confirm this, but with the death machine I noticed, you can earn a death machine, start using it, and you can be firing and killing multiple enemies, and then when you get killed, you respawn and still have the remaining ammo on that death machine. In my opinion, the moment you fire a shot with a death machine or a war machine, you should lose that streak on death. I get it, it's frustrating if you pull it out and don't have a chance to fire the shot. I don't think you should lose it at that point. But the moment a shot is fired, your streak should now be locked to that life and that life only. The moment you die, it should be gone, especially with how easy it is to earn those streaks. They're relatively mid to low range streaks. And then finally, also on the topic of kill streaks, the glide bomb. I do think the glide bomb needs a little bit of work. I've heard for mouse and keyboard, it was nearly impossible to control the glide bomb whatsoever. Like, it was just completely terrible. So obviously, I hope they get on top of that so mouse and keyboard users can actually use a glide bomb. But even just in general, on controller as well, I noticed this. I just don't feel like I have very much control over that glide bomb. Part of it's the camera angle being a little bit weird, but another part I noticed is the last half second or so before that glide bomb hits the ground, it seems like you just don't have any control over it. It's kind of locked in place and it's going where it's going. And I don't know if that's an intentional design decision, but in either case, it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like you have the control that I feel you should have while using that streak. But with that, that's pretty much it. That's going to wrap it up for the main things that I noticed throughout the beta. I'm sure there's a bunch of little things that you guys may point out in the comment section that I might look at and go like, oh yeah, actually, I agree with that. But these are the main things that I noticed and jotted down that I feel could use some improvement going forward in Vanguard. Again, just wanted to restate, I had an awesome time with this beta, and I'm really looking forward to launch. I think I'm going to enjoy this game quite a bit, especially compared to a game like Modern Warfare, for instance. But that is just my opinion. I know a lot of you will disagree, and that's fine. The only thing I ask is please respect my opinion. I respect yours. If you hate this game, that's fine. I respect your opinion. Please don't get offended because I enjoy a video game that you don't enjoy, and I won't get offended if you hate the game that I'm enjoying. And speaking of opinions, this is where I want to hear from you guys in the comments section below. What did you guys think of the Vanguard beta, and what sort of changes would you like to see made between now and launch? Just let me know all of those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.